and I also lead as the project on women's economic empowerment through affirmative procurement in West Africa, implementation in Nigeria. So thank you very much once again for joining this webinar. Before we commence, essentially, I would want to provide some house rules and how the webinar is going to proceed. First, this meeting will be in English and French, and we will have simultaneous interpretation in both languages. So as I said earlier on, there's a globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom page. You can click it and choose the language of your choice, the language of preference. Also, I have to also indicate that this webinar is recorded. And please, if you have any questions, I'll be able to track them if you include them in the chat box, the question and answer box. So there is a question and answer box there. As we proceed, if you have any questions, please include them there and I will be able to track them. Our agenda for today, so please let's go to the slide on the agenda. So I've already concluded the first part. What I will also do now is to present the agenda and an overview of the event. So we'll be having our opening remarks, and then we'll proceed to setting the scene on why we're here. And then after that, we'll look at a presentation on the recommendations of the policy brief. So today in this webinar, we'll be presenting the research findings on a policy brief that was developed. This policy brief was developed by UN Women in collaboration with OCP, Open Contracting Partnership. And the findings and the research is being funded by the WIFI initiative and AFAWA through the African Development Bank. After we present these policy briefs and the findings, we will have a question and answer session. So you will please have to also indicate some of your questions in the question and answer chat box. And then we'll have a panel discussion. And the panel discussion will focus largely on leveraging regional public procurement opportunities for women-owned businesses, with an emphasis on bottlenecks and good practices. And also after that, we'll also take some questions and answers. And after the question and answers, we'll conclude by having a closing, and we'll also conduct a poll, a post-event feedback. So essentially, while we want to present some of our findings on this research, it's also an opportunity to share knowledge on what works when it comes to gender-responsive procurement. Please, I want to ask participants to please ensure that they follow the sessions and the presentations, and most importantly, please ask your questions, provide your feedback, and provide your comments on the policy brief's findings, as well as from your experience. Having said that, it will be important that we go to the next stage, which is the opening remarks. And I want to call on Mr. Basil Jones, who is the lead program and policy coordinator, Gender, Women, and Civil Society Department with the African Development Bank. Basil Jones, please, over to you for the opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Emeka. Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the Director of the Gender, Women, and Civil Society Department of the African Development Bank, Ms. Malado Kaba, let me welcome all of you to this very important webinar. Let me also thank UN Women and Open Contracting Partners for this very important study on improving access to public procurement for women-owned and women-led SMEs in West Africa. For us at the bank, affirmative procurement is a very important work stream in our gender strategy. And because of this, we included affirmative procurement as part of the WIFI proposal that the bank submitted to the World Bank Group for 4 countries in West Africa that UN Women is now implementing. Promoting women enterprises is one of the bank's top priorities. Hence, the bank created the Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, or what we call the AFAWA program, which is a Pan-Africa program to bridge the financing gap for women in Africa and releasing their entrepreneurial capacity. Because we discovered as part of the work that we do through AFAWA that there's a 42 billion gender financing gap in the continent. Women-owned and women-led businesses are a growing share of all enterprises in many African countries. And studies have indicated that up to a third of formal firms in sub-Saharan Africa report women ownership and participation. Public procurement, therefore, represents an attractive market for women entrepreneurs, since it accounts for between 15 to 30% of GDP globally. In addition, procurement can sometimes consume as much as 50% of gross national product in some countries. Public procurement, therefore, creates market opportunities that have long been recognized as an engine for growth for small and medium enterprises. However, women-owned small and medium enterprises are severely underrepresented as suppliers, securing only an estimated 1% of the $10 trillion that is spent annually on public procurement. I think we need to do better than that. 1% is such a small amount. In West Africa, women remain underrepresented as entrepreneurs accessing public procurement opportunities. In Senegal, for instance, a UN Women Commission study notes that less than 10% of women entrepreneurs are aware of the legislation on affirmative procurement, and less than 5% declare being fully aware of the process and modes of public procurement. The disparities between women's economic participation and inclusive growth exists partly because most of the WSMEs are currently engaged at the meso and micro level within the informal economy and not involved in macro level activities, such as procuring public goods and services. Gender policies for public procurement have a particular relevance in the Africa region in light of the need to open up opportunities for women, both for reasons of equity and for unleashing job creation, economic development, and innovation. The role of such policies takes on added importance in the region because of the important role that women entrepreneurs play in conflict-affected countries. Finally, we need to engage our public procurement institutions, in particular, the Africa Public Procurement Networks that aims at supporting procurement reforms across Africa, and in particular, their thematic work on gender considerations in public procurement. So I look forward to the presentation and the lively discussions, and be rest assured that the African Development Bank will engage all of you on the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Basil, for those very insightful opening remarks, particularly around the identification of challenges that women-owned businesses experience across the region. In your remarks, it's very interesting to note that the African Development Bank is prioritizing gender-responsive procurement. And as you have said, and clearly said, it provides a pathway for solving some of these identified challenges that women-owned businesses face. Thank you very much for those opening remarks. We'll also be taking another opening remarks. And this time it will be from Mr. Edwin Muhumuza, who is the head of Africa for Open Contracting Partnership. Sir, over to you, Mr. Edwin, for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, moderator, and I want to thank all the participants that have made time to participate in this important webinar. As I've been introduced, I'm Edwin Mumza, Head of Africa, the Open Contracting Partnership. The Open Contracting Partnership is a non-profit global organization that supports procurement reform to make it open, inclusive, and even where possible, to automate it so that we achieve the benefits that public procurement has the potential to in most of these African countries, but also, globally. And women in procurement is one of the areas as we've dealt with. And as I'll shortly state, I'll give the reasons why it's a very important subject to us. Public procurement is extremely important because a substantial amount of the public financial management system is expended through public procurement. In fact, when you go to most African countries, over 60% of government budgets are allocated through public procurement. And so with that allocative strength, it also provides the opportunity to use public procurement as a tool to promote inclusiveness, especially of those parts of our society that have traditionally been left behind. And in many African countries, women are part of that group that has always been left behind. So public procurement provides a very good opportunity to work around that historical injustice. We've worked with partners previously across the continent to study this subject, because we believe at OCP that any intervention should be evidence-based. We've carried out a study in East Africa in 5 countries to check the barriers of entrance for women-led businesses in public procurement. We've done with partners previously the same in South Africa, using our Lift Accelerator program, one of the flagship projects of OCP. We have also done the same in Ekiti. And of course, recent, we have also engaged with the UN Women West Africa, who are working with us to organize even this webinar, but also we have a policy brief to that effect. And as we may all know, the barriers to women-led businesses in public procurement are a little bit similar to what all businesses, whether they are led by men, face: corruption, lack of finance, complicated tender requirements, lack of access to information. But this tends to affect women-led businesses more because of the other traditional injustice I've already talked about. They tend to have more problems accessing finance. They tend to be more affected by corrupt tendencies, as the studies that we have done have shown. And so based on those studies, we've also seen the potential that public procurement provides in accelerating or lifting up women-led businesses. In our accelerator program in Ekiti, for example, we saw that with a few interventions like change in policy, in laws, capacity building, the number of women-led businesses that registered for public procurement increased over 3%. You had cases where a number of contracts that were now going to women-led businesses in just that. It gave us confidence that where certain deliberate interventions could be made across the continent, then we would have actually a significant leap in these women-led businesses, because they provide employment. And we have also seen that when you have economically empowered women, from other studies, they tend to enable, especially in Africa, the society to actually get lifted up, because they tend to be the engine of growth in many of these places that they are. So it's a very important subject matter, and I want to encourage us to take it very seriously in the countries we're in, to provide all the support that is required, the advocacy, be evidence-based, because the problems are not the same in the different localities. In some cases, it's the laws and regulations that need to change. In other places, it's where access to finance is a problem for these women-led businesses. In other places, as I've already noted, it is even just defining who a women-led business is, so that these specific interventions do not get abused. So I want to encourage us to have good discussion this afternoon or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. And the deliberations from this webinar will go ahead in adding a small contribution, or in fact, a big contribution to these initiatives that have already taken place in the studies, in the discussions, and with so many partners that are now trying to encourage and promote women-led businesses such as the IDRC, the UN Women, OCP, and we have powerful partners that can push this, like the African Development Bank and the World Bank, who account for a lot of the development financing for the public procurement projects within Africa. So thank you very much, and I look forward to very good discussions in this webinar.
Thank you very much, Edwin. Thank you very much for those very insightful opening remarks, particularly around how OCP envisions how we can use the initiative of gender-responsive procurement to actually support women-owned businesses across the region. And I do agree with you. The challenges of women-owned businesses are not homogeneous within these countries, and we must be very strategic, as well as ensuring that all our interventions are supported by evidence. Thank you very much for those comments. Participants, please, I said earlier on, ensure to introduce yourself in the chat box, your name, your organization, and where you are joining us from. Also, if you have questions, please, you can also drop those questions in the question and answer session. For this webinar, we have simultaneous interpretation in both English and French. Kindly please click on the globe icon below on the Zoom interface, and you choose your language of preference. Okay, having said that, we'll go to the next session of this webinar. And in this session, we'll try and we want to set the scene for why we are here. And this is very important. It's an important aspect of the webinar because it gives you a very good overview, as well as an understanding of why this is important and why we are here today. And to anchor that, I want to call on the regional advisor for women's economic empowerment with UN Women in the West and Central Africa region, Elena Ruiz Abreu. Over to you.
Thank you, Emeka. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to all participants. On behalf of UN Women, it's really a pleasure to welcome you all to this virtual policy dialogue on gender-responsive procurement reform in West Africa. Let me open my remarks and start by stating the obvious, and as Emeka said, the reason why we are here. I mean, across the globe, across the world, the public procurement market represents $1 trillion opportunity. And despite this, women-owned business access only 1% of procurement contracts. I completely agree with my predecessor, Dr. Jones. We need to do better than that. And that is why we are here. This is the reality, and it's a very unequal reality. As you know, UN Women is the UN agency that works for gender equality and women's empowerment. And for us, promoting women's economic empowerment is at the core of our mandate. Working to improve the conditions for women's participation in the economy and fighting gender discrimination in all spheres of society, including in the economy, is part of the work that we do to deliver our mandate, working alongside partners, governments, regional institutions, civil society, and most important, women. West Africa is one of the regions of the world with the most dynamic female entrepreneurship. However, women experience still serious problems to access information, finance, and markets. This is why initiatives like the Project Women's Economic Empowerment through Affirmative Procurement Reform in West Africa, financed by WIFI and the African Development Bank, are so critical. This project addresses a critical bottleneck by supporting women's capacities to access markets, in this case, public markets. Across the region, and we've heard that already, the size of women-owned businesses is often a major barrier to compete in public tenders. That's why it's so important to articulate together strategies to access markets and to facilitate women's access to finance so that they can grow their business and seize the large opportunities that exist in public procurement. In a context where markets are growing even larger through regional integration in the light of the implementation of AFCFTA, this is now more critical than ever to make sure that women-owned businesses are not left behind, left out of these tremendous opportunities that the African Free Trade Zone will bring about. When we ask women entrepreneurs why sometimes they are not interested in applying for public tenders, or when they apply, why they cannot succeed, I mean, they talk about the lack of information, the complex application processes, the long delays in payments. And that is why it's so important to work with our partners in national procurement agencies and regional institutions to change this. But they also talk about unfair competition and an unlevel playing field when competing with men-owned SMEs, because women-owned businesses bear the burden of unpaid care work, which limits the time that they can spend operating their business, and sometimes even determine the type of business that they can run. They also talk about the impact of gender-based violence, because for women-owned business, and this is different for men-owned enterprises, the woman is the business, and what happens to the woman has direct consequences on her business activity. They also talk about abuses and corruption practices in the form of sex for contracts at the final stages of procurement processes. So while procurement processes are designed to be blind, objective, promote fair competition and transparent rules, the reality is that they are not, because they build on societies that are not blind, objective, fair, or equal. That is why UN Women promotes gender-responsive and affirmative procurement reform in West Africa and across the globe. This is a priority for the organization as a whole. We believe that gender-responsive procurement can accelerate women's economic empowerment and participation, and these are essential ingredients to build resilient and prosperous societies. And with that, I would like to end my remarks, looking forward to hearing all the presentations and all the discussion for the different participants in the room, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena, for that elaborative remarks. What is very striking in the remarks, and often neglected when we talk about procurement, is the link of procurement and its practices to reinforcing gender biases, gender-based violence, and limiting women's economic activities. For example, in Nigeria, we've seen some situations where this happens. And it's very striking that you have been able to buttress these points and highlight them. And I find them very striking. So thank you very much, Elena, for those remarks. So we thank all our speakers so far for the 3 remarks from the African Development Bank, from Open Contracting Partnerships, and from UN Women. So now we will go to, well, what I would say more elaborative and more exposés around the research we've been able to conduct on public procurement, especially from the gender dimensions. So now we'll go to the next session on setting the scene. The presentations will focus largely on gender responsive procurement from being a national concept to the potentials and possibilities for having a gender affirmative action procurement as a way for inter and intra-regional integration. For this session, I will call on my very good friend and also a good colleague, Andy Okon, to give this presentation. She is the programs manager for OCP. Andy, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Emeka, for the introduction, and to everyone that has given an opening remark on this webinar and the launch of our policy brief. As Emeka already said, I'm Andy Okon, the programs manager with Open Contracting Partnership, and I'm just going to be setting the scene to give you a better understanding of some of the concerns around gender responsive procurement and why it's something we should be giving consideration to in West Africa. Next slide. So you may not know, but actually public spending through procurement globally is at an estimated $13 trillion. And women are actually excelling in business, and it's interesting to see the statistics around how much women get to participate in this opportunity. So according to the World Bank, women-owned businesses contribute about 30%. If you can take me to my next slide. Accounts for about 30% of the small and medium enterprises worldwide. So it's interesting to see that women account for that much of the participation in business, but let's see how much they participate in public procurement opportunities. Next slide, please. Women actually only account for 1%. They only have access to 1% of procurement contracts, suggesting that there's a systemic gender disparity within the procurement systems. And we've seen that if an intersectional lens is applied to public procurement, there are certain factors that affect this. Things around race, disability, and geography even further limit your access to public procurement opportunities as a woman-led business. But public procurement definitely presents a huge opportunity to build a more inclusive economy and increase the participation of women in public procurement, and also improve gender equality in the public procurement space. Next slide. And bringing it home to West Africa, some of our countries in West Africa actually spend up to 1/6 of their GDP on procurement, and women still remain underrepresented in accessing public procurement opportunities. In Senegal, for instance, less than 10% of women entrepreneurs, we found through the study that less than 10% of women entrepreneurs were aware of the legislation on affirmative procurement, and less than 5% actually declare being fully aware of the process and modes of public procurement in the country. And we'll be hearing from the team in Senegal about what strides they have made in making their procurement process more equal, including bringing about equality and implementing gender responsive procurement in their setting. Next slide. Thank you. And in Africa as a whole, we've seen that women-owned Listen kindly on one of the co-hosts, please help me mute that person. Pardon the interruption. In Africa, 45% of women-owned businesses have actually raised the need that there's a need to set up quotas for women-owned enterprises in women-owned businesses in the public procurement space. This is one of the ways that consideration is actually given to women-owned businesses, but we're going to explore some other ways and some of the challenges that women-owned businesses actually experience in public procurement. Next. So to put this in better perspective, we at Open Contracting believe that a gender-inclusive open contracting approach, which is about publishing all the information around the contracting process, all the way from planning to implementation throughout the stages of procurement, can actually shift the power dynamics in favor of gender equality and inclusive growth. Next slide. So I'm going to touch on the different barriers that actually affect women-owned businesses, the challenges we've seen in previous work that we've done with UN Women and still in our most recent policy brief, some of the findings we've seen around what barriers women face. So typically we see that it's difficult for women-owned businesses, it's difficult to identify what a woman-owned business is. So it's very important when you're thinking about gender-responsive procurement that you define what it is, and new research, some of the work we've done provides some innovative ideas on how to build on the data sets around gender-responsive procurement and how to define what a woman-owned business is or what a woman-led business is. Another challenge that women-owned businesses have is that there's a negative perception on both sides that impact bids on both sides. Women have a bias thinking that they can't win public contracts, can't participate in the procurement process. And on the flip side, the government also does not have confidence in women-owned businesses having the capital or the resources or the know-how to actually implement some of their contracts. Another big limitation for women-owned businesses is the lack of access to finance. So due to discriminatory practices in financial institutions and in our different economies, we've seen that it limits the ability of women-owned businesses to actually acquire the working capital that they need to implement public contracts. And of course, we've seen the percentages. We know that most women-owned businesses are actually registered as small and medium enterprises. And we've seen this in Latin America, East Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa, that women lead on average, that women businesses are on average SMEs, and that they account for about 23% of small businesses in these regions, as compared to being only 11% of what is defined as a large business. Next slide. Thank you. So something else that we've seen that proves to be a challenge for women-owned businesses is that there are discriminatory social and cultural legal norms, and women then tend to have unpaid cared work. So women, because of discriminatory practices culturally, we have seen that women-owned businesses don't even have, this is one of the things that actually limits the finance that they can have for running their own businesses. And of course, Elena touched on this, there is harassment and gender-based violence. We've seen situations where women are expected to pay for contracts with sex. Those are some of the challenges that we see across board that women face when trying to do business with the government. And another thing is that sometimes the knowledge, women don't have access to information or knowledge, and this limits their access to business networks that they can leverage on or be a part of, and possibly collaborate with other organizations to be subcontractors. And that also touches on my next point, that they have a limited access to training and information. So that's one of the things that gender responsive procurement addresses, building the capacity of these women-owned businesses to participate in government contracts. And of course, one of the challenges, and I think this cuts across board, is that often we see that there are long delays in payment by the government for contracts. And for smaller enterprises that don't have as much capital to run projects, it's a difficult situation, and they're usually challenged in delivering their projects. And then finally, we see that with women-owned businesses, a lot of them have not formalized. They may not be registered with their Corporate Affairs Commission, which is what it's called in Nigeria. They may not be formally registered businesses, and they operate very informally, so they don't have adequate documentation, and they're not able to meet the basic prerequisites for participating in public procurement. Next slide. Thank you. So finally, I want to touch on a practical example, and we're going to hear from one of our women-owned businesses in Ekiti State. At OCP, through our LIFT program that Edwin mentioned earlier, we've been able to work closely with the government of Ekiti State, their Bureau of Public Procurement, to increase the participation of women-owned businesses in winning contracts and in participating in government contracting opportunities. One of the biggest gaps that we've been able to fill so far as we're documenting this particular project is that there was a lack of knowledge. That seemed to be one of the biggest challenges, that women did not feel they had enough information about the procurement process. They weren't familiar with the procurement process. So one of the first steps was that we carried out a survey, and that was what informed our findings. That was our baseline study that informed the findings on how we would implement the project. And the next step was that we did some capacity building activities, and we saw that we had, at the start of the project, we had only 30 women-owned businesses registered with the Bureau of Public Procurement. And as of today, we have about 158 women-owned businesses that are now registered with the Bureau and are competing for contracts. And in the near future, we will be sharing the equity story with all of you, our audience. And something else that we were able to do in that state was that we developed procurement guidelines. So there was an update to their existing procurement manual and the procurement guidelines to include gender responsive language and gender responsive framing to encourage more women to participate in the process. And of course, it's one thing to bring all these interventions, and then the implementers, the actual foot soldiers doing the work, who are the procurement officers, may not be familiar. So it's important that we also build their capacity and bring them up to speed on the changes in the policy. And finally, we leveraged on the open contracting data standard. Ekiti State has what we call the OCDS portal, where they publish their procurement information for the public to access. And this was what also helped women-owned businesses learn about procurement opportunities in the state. So at this point, I will hand it over to our moderator for further details around our policy brief. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy, for that presentation. I think you've made it very clear that there is an economic as well as social rationale for supporting gender responsive procurement. I think it does make economic sense to do that. However, there are a plethora of challenges that limit women-owned businesses to access public procurement. And the emphasis here on accessing is not necessarily limited to just participating, it's also on being successful in bidding for such public contracts. So thank you very much for that. Participants, I think we can start reflecting on some of these challenges. As we said earlier on, and this was also reflected in some of the remarks, that some of these challenges may not be homogeneous to your country. They may also vary by the degree of magnitude of manifestation in such countries. But what is very, very clear and very, very obvious is that women-owned businesses are becoming an increasing share of businesses within our various countries, but have limited access to public procurement. So what UN Women has done, and in collaboration with OCP, is to conduct this policy brief and come up with very strong recommendations on how, for example, we can even replicate some of the successes that we've had already in Ekiti State. So having said that, we'll go to the next session. And in this session, we want to, is the presentation of the recommendations from the policy brief. That policy brief focuses on improving access to public procurements for women-owned and women-led medium enterprises in West Africa. So for this presentation, let me call on Dr. Muriel Ametoglu, who is our Gender and Economic Policy Regional Specialist with UN Women. Muriel, over to you.
Thank you, Emeka, and hello to all the participants. Our policy brief first builds on the data that Andy has presented. What is the state of gender responsive procurement? What are the constraints that women face? And based on that, we put together a set of recommendations. So those recommendations are both for regional organizations, there's national procurement agencies, national government, in order to have better policies or better framework on women access to public procurement. So Elena, in her opening remarks, talked about the need for women to benefit from the regional integration. So regional integration, whereas through the AFCFTA, or even regional integration in our zone through the ECOWAS or the YMU region. So why do we need to have a regional gender responsive public procurement? Having a regulation at the national level is already difficult, but we need to think at the regional level for women to access tenders in other countries. So if you take in West Africa, for example, we have some countries that have adopted provision for women lately, but still women-owned businesses cannot really fully take advantage of the regional integration in our zone. This is mainly due first because there is no harmonization of the definition of SMEs or the definition of even women-owned businesses across countries. So we have different definition across countries, making women sometimes eligible to apply for a tender in another neighboring country. And also, perhaps most important, we don't have a minimum regional target on public procurement that countries can collectively follow. So you have countries that are 15% here, 2% there, but there is no a minimum target that country follows. So based on that, we see that there is really a need to improve the regional environment for gender responsive procurement, which will make it mandatory for national government to make provision for women in public procurement. So we have, you will see in our policy brief, a set of 5 recommendations that we have for you. And the first recommendation is for regional organization. For example, the ECOWAS Commission, the YMU, or in French version, the UEMOA Commission, to reinforce the legal and policy framework in our region. So that can be done by establishing or strengthening existing policy environment, by harmonizing the definition. We need to have a common definition. What is a women-owned business? What is a women-owned SMEs across the state? We need to have a quota or a target of public procurement spending that should be allocated to women-owned businesses. We need to have we need to have simplified procurement processes and procedures across the region, and also be able to collect the data, analyze the data, not only in one country, but across the region, to have access on information about how many women-owned businesses participate into public tenders. And based on those data, to be able to have a regional policy-making decision in order to improve the rules. So that's the first key recommendation that we have. So moving to our second recommendation, we also have the need to combat gender discrimination while women while they're accessing gender tenders. I think in this presentation, we've said that gender violence is a key element that women-owned business face. Most of the time, they ask for sexual favors in order to access the tender. So first, there is a need to increase the number of women in all levels of public administration. We need to conduct research on the prevalence of sexual harassment that women face across the member states in these regions, and also to be able to develop education campaigns that will target any form of corruption or any form of gender-based violence while dealing in public procurement administration, which is really important. So our third message is more on enhancing the capacity both of the national and regional procurement officials, because gender responsive procurement is what we can say a new topic. So we need to train more people in order to really customize the tenders in order for women to be able to access it. So for that, we call for training or capacity building sessions for national, but also regional procurement agencies, but also the heads and the managers of agencies. So the target is to mainstream gender responsive procedures or across procurement agencies. There's also a need to apply a gender lens to the work while starting the procurement process throughout the procurement sourcing or requirements in order to advance gender equality among supplier bases. The fourth message is targeted for women. So we don't only need to train national or regional public procurement agencies, but we also need to facilitate women access to capital, facilitate women access to information, facilitate women access to the environment of public procurement so that they could be capacitated in order to apply to the tenders. So the first message is to support women entrepreneurs with training so that they can understand the system and the process, because procurement processes are not easy to understand. So you have a lot of complicated rules. So it's really important to train those women so that they can first access the information, understand the information, and support them in preparing strong bids during the process. So the second sub-message is to promote intra-regional trade and procurement across countries. So the FCFTA will offer a lot of opportunities for women, especially in public procurement. So women will need to have access to the information and access to network in order to benefit for these advantages. We also call for advocacy strategies to design or transform financial services so that they can meet the needs of women entrepreneurs in order to for them to have access to credit, to have access to collateral, even and especially for women in the rural areas. So our last message is about having data. So in order to see if countries are making progress, in order to see if countries are following rules and the regulations at the regional level, we need to have gender disaggregated data. So for that, we are calling for the need to have a sex disaggregated data about leaders, about suppliers, Okay. So I was saying we need to have sex disaggregated data about bidders, suppliers at the local level, at the national level, at the regional level, in order to monitor countries' progress toward gender responsive contracting. And for that, we also need to develop gender responsive benchmark and indicators that will help each country or each national procurement agency to conduct annual procurement audits so that we can have data. What is the amount of public procurement that has been allocated to women? And we need and we call for more research around gender responsive procurement. We've launched this policy brief, but there are more research that needs to be done at the country level, at the regional level, to better understand and document what are the experiences that women are facing, what are the constraints, what are the bottlenecks on the ground, and also hear from good practices and try to document all that, both at the national level, at the regional level, which will help really increase the environment, which will help to tailor better regulation for women. And lastly, we call for not having research, but also having tools that can drive procurement change and cultural change in the region. So UN Women, we have done a lot of work on affirmative procurement, and we have some tools that can be used. Our colleagues from OCP as well, but we call for more. And also working with national agencies, it's important to have gender responsive tool in order to target women and to better to have better services for them. And so those are the 5 key messages that you will find in our policy brief that we will share with you through email. And you can also find it in our website, both UN Women website and OCP website. So I will stop there and over to you, Emeka. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muriel. Thank you for that presentation of the findings. What's very interesting is that these findings have been categorized into 5 different messages, and they cut across all the challenges that had been earlier identified. So colleagues, participants, we're now going to a very important part of this webinar, which is the question and answer session. As I said earlier on, I'll ask that we do ask our questions in the chat box, question and answer session. So I can scroll through and see if I have some questions already on the chat box. I've seen one. This question is very interesting because for every gender responsive procurement seminar, training, or workshop I have attended, the question of definition is always a challenge. So our presenters, there is a question already on how do you verify the status of women-owned businesses, considering that most of these businesses operate in the informal sector. And then secondly, are we using UN Women's standard definition of women-owned businesses, or are we using any other definition? So what definition are we using in identifying who is a woman-owned business or a woman-led business? Muriel, Andy, could you provide answers? So please, you can ask more questions in the chat box and I'll be reading them out.
Yes, I am happy to answer that question. We are using the UN Women defined definition of a woman-owned business, and this is detailed in the policy brief that will be shared with you. But from the top of my head is basically the definition that says a woman-owned business is a sole proprietorship, one solely owned by a woman, one where at least 51% of the ownership is by a woman, or one where a woman is in a leadership role at CEO or COO level.
Muriel, would there be any response to that? I can also say that with the public procurement authorities in Lagos and Kaduna State in Nigeria, the issues of definition has always come to play. Sometimes there is the argument that would it not be better to use national definitions of who a woman-owned business is or a woman-led business is. I don't know if the colleagues from Lagos and Kaduna State are here. They can also chip in asking their questions. Okay, there is another question on monitoring tools. What monitoring tools were provided in carrying out the research, or what monitoring tools are being proposed in the policy brief?
In previous work that we've done, the monitoring tool we've used is from the Oxford Insights Inclusion Assessment Frameworks, and it covers both qualitative and quantitative frameworks for accessing inclusiveness of public procurement systems. And I can share the link to this resource for you if you want to do some research around that. It's called the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion in Public Procurement Framework.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there's also another question. I don't think this is a question, this is more of a comment on having a training on implementing the monitoring and evaluation framework that is being proposed in the policy brief. I don't know how to answer that. I think that's more of a comment. Is there going to be a training on that?
Yes, OCP and UN Women are definitely considering beyond the policy brief, what are our next steps? How do we want to continue to engage with our community around the work in the policy brief? So potentially in the near future, we should see a workshop on the subject matter.
Thank you very much. Interestingly, I've not seen any other question. Please, participants, if you have any question, you can put it in the chat box. I'll be able to see them and read them out to our presenters. Interestingly, as I was saying, Andy, and I hope this is not going to be just a conversation between you and I, we are conducting a training on women-owned businesses in Nigeria to assess public procurement. And one reoccurring issue that keeps coming up to the front is access to finance. So I'm not necessarily that I'm asking the question, but this is feedback I've already gotten from majority of the women-owned businesses is what methodologies in practical terms can they have to access financing? I don't know if you could throw more light on it.
In terms of access to finance, what we see in both sides for the women-owned businesses and also for the government side of things, there are innovative ways and different considerations that can be made. One we're exploring, we gave thought to, but we haven't yet implemented in Ekiti State, was partnering with financial institutions to provide specific loans for women-owned businesses and another thing was reducing the barriers to entry for women-owned businesses. So in examples where organizations would typically have to show an advance payment guarantee, it was a different criteria for the small and medium enterprises, women-owned businesses, where they were providing some form of collateral to show that they can, an assurance basically, that they can cover the capital required to deliver on the project. And it's great because on the call today, we actually have one of the women-owned businesses from Ekiti State here, and she's supported by the Bureau of Public Procurement from Ekiti State, and they'll be sharing on their experience in the state. So you might think of some other practical ways. Another way to tackle the challenge around access to finance is, as a woman-owned business, being a part of a business network where you can all potentially bid under one large woman-led company, and then the smaller and more informal businesses can serve as subcontractors on the project as well. So that reduces the challenge, the burden of financing a project on your own.
Oh, fantastic. So I think yes, over to you, Miriam.
Yes, thank you. Now on your question about access to finance for women, I wanted to give the example of Senegal, where you have UN Women is working has a partnership with La Caisse des Marchés Publics, which is the public procurement fund. And so they work together in giving guarantees for women-owned businesses that are applying for public procurement bids. So we have our colleagues, Abdul Karim on the phone, so I'm sure he'll come back in the Q&A session to tell us more about their experience. But I think this is also one of the way. And in the panel, we'll have the example of some reforms in Senegal towards women. But I think in our region, Senegal is one of the lead countries providing finance, but also providing reforms for women-owned businesses in order to get access to public procurement. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Muriel. I think we are far behind in time. We may need to speed things up, but I see some of the very insightful comments in the chat box. Ale Agredo, I think UN Women is working to, we do have some of those training materials, technical assistance on gender responsive procurement. We're already providing that across the regions in West Africa and Central Africa region. Mr. Onofote Fatai, who is the DG Lagos State Public Procurement Agency, is of the opinion that advocacy is going to be very important in pushing this agenda. And I do agree, especially with respect to the part of having policy reforms, as well as providing this business case for including gender responsive procurement. Also, we have a comment on the fact that UN Women is already conducting a training for women-owned businesses around gender-responsive procurement by Precious Iberi. Thank you for that comment. So we have a lot of comments now rolling in. We'll try and provide answers to all those comments. What we want to do now is go to the next session because we are running out of time. There's a further question and answer session after this panel session. So we will still take all your questions later on. Thank you very much, colleagues. So having said that, we go to the next session. And in the next session, we're going to have a panel discussion. The panel discussion focuses on leveraging regional public procurement opportunities for women-owned businesses, with the focus on what the bottlenecks are and what good practices can be. In this session, please can we mute? In this session, we are going to have Toyin Bolanle Dorojaye from Blessing Toyak Enterprises. We're also going to have colleagues from Senegal, the state country public procurement regulator. We have Dr. Baye Samba Diop and also Fatma Awayel Sal. So these are going to be the three colleagues who are going to be in the panel session. I will ask the first question to Mrs. Toyin Bolanle. Ms. Toyin Bolanle, are you there? Are you there with us?
Yes.
Okay. The first question to her. So from your experience, what are the bottlenecks that women entrepreneurs face in assessing public procurement at the national and regional levels? Over to you, Ms. Toyin.
Experience.
Can you hear me, Ms. Toyin?
Yes.
I asked the question, let me repeat it again. I said, from your experience as a woman entrepreneur, what are the challenges, what are the bottlenecks that women entrepreneurs like yourself face in trying to assess public procurement at the national level as well as the regional level? Over to you.
Thank you. At the inception of the interaction within the getting contract, experience man no man syndrome. That is, we know somebody before we can get a contract.
Madam Toyin, please can you also adjust your camera so that we could see you while you give your intervention, while you speak, because we can't clearly see you. That's fine. Over to you.
Thank you. At the experience of the interaction within the getting contracts, experience man no woman. That is, man no man syndrome. That is, we know somebody before we can get contract. The area of documentation. The area of documentation. I was not versed in complying the right documentation for bidding, but gradually I intend in document. intend in process. Preference treatment for men. Preference treatment for men. That is, they believe women are weaker and could not perform a contract execution. Financially, many are not really available to pick up tender documents for large contracts. That is, if tender could be higher as 2 million or 3 million, they may think the women cannot be able to afford it.
Oh, thank you very much, madam. I think I can also articulate what your interventions were. I think in your first point, you made reference to the fact that oftentimes when it comes to public procurement, there is a difficulty associated with women-owned businesses and women entrepreneurs having the requisite social capital, as well as the possibility of leveraging of relationships within the procurement landscape to be able to get public access to public procurement. So this is something we also see in our various countries where male-owned businesses often have this larger form of social capital, and then they use it to get these public procurements. Andy?
Yes, I just wanted to say, if there's someone from the Bureau of Public Procurement in Ekiti State that can also give a summary of what it is she was trying to say, since there was
Okay, do we have the colleague online?
Yes.
Okay, please.
Please go ahead.
Can you see me? Can you see me?
Fatma, not you yet. We'll come to you after that. Yes.
Okay,
so to
thank
the
you,
colleague
everyone.
from Ekiti State, please over to you.
Yes, from Ekiti State. Thank you, everyone. In summary, she's trying to say that when she goes into the business of into public procurement, getting access to contracts within the state, that she experienced the man-no-man syndrome, at least that you have to know someone before you get a contract. You have to press some buttons, and you know this man-no-man syndrome. So she had difficulty in that, and she was a bit discouraged when she started at initially. And also that in the area of documentation, that is compiling the bidding documents, she had no understanding of how to do that. And most times when she bids, she doesn't get qualified because she doesn't have the right documentation in her bidding. And also she experienced preferential treatment from men-owned businesses because they feel that this one should be preferred over the other. And this really made her lose a lot of interest, and she lost confidence in the process, that maybe public procurement is not really meant for her. But as she proceeds gradually, she could understand that when she has the right documentation and then she's able to compile her documents well and to make to go through the processes, that she will be able to, and so far so good. In the last 5 years of being in public procurement, she has got a lot of contracts, let's say maximum of 7, and she's still bidding because presently in Ekiti State, Sube project, it's on and the advert is on and she's bidding. And she's also encouraging all other women-owned businesses to bid and to also disabuse their minds of the wrong mindset that they had, that women-owned businesses cannot have access to contracts. She also mentioned that in the contracts that have a huge contract volume, amount of contracts that women are a bit discouraged because they feel that they won't be able to handle such contracts. And the men also, because the area of public procurement in states is a bit dominated by men, they also discourage them that they don't have that confidence and that financial buoyancy to
Hello, Oluwaseun, are you still with us? Are you done? Okay, I think we got the main points that you were trying to make, and I think it's very striking. Something that had earlier been said, that the challenges that women-owned businesses face across our region are not homogeneous. So you can see the very clear case of Stoin, where she was able to, through specific interventions by OCP, she was able to transcend some of those challenges and participate in public procurements. Thank you very much, Ms. Stoin, for your interventions and your submissions. I will want to call upon Fatma from Senegal. Fatma, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, excellent. So we have a question for you.
Yes.
As a regulator in Senegal, what reforms has Senegal undertaken for gender responsive procurement? How could a regional reform at the level of ECOWAS or at the level of the West African Economic Monetary Union advance an effective implementation on national reforms? So please, Fatma, let me just also highlight that we have just 5 minutes for this intervention. So please just summarize your answers. Over to you, Fatma.
Should I speak in English or in French? I've put the interpreter in English, but I don't know.
You can go with Muriel, French,
With
or
English.
English.
French or English, depends on you. Fine.
Your strongest.
Okay, I don't know which one to pick, but okay. So we have started with the PPP law. I'm gonna start in the beginning. First of all, the directives number 4 of 2005 about the procedure in public procurement, which was made by the Monetary Union of West Africa, has started with allotment practices, but also preference margin. But it was directed to PMEs and small and medium enterprise. So our regulation right now went further because I think that in the regional area, we didn't have much regulation about promoting PMEs and women's, because PMEs were for youth and also for women. So what we did in Senegal is that we have the new decree, the new public procurement decree, which has made reserved public procurement contracts for women. If you see in the law, we have now 5%, 2% of a public procurement contract must be reserved to women, that is the first thing. The second one is that now we have the possibility to allot contracts in public procurement. It is also in the same law. Also, we have preferred margin, which was inspired by the monetary union that I was talking about later, previously, and it's for like group month of offers, which is a 5% margin. But what is important is that we have came to the resolution that it is not only laws and regulation that will help women, because they are still exposed to different issues, which are the requirement of guarantees, the difficulties regarding delivery, the difficulties in accessing bank credit, the lack of allotment, which was taken into account in this new law, the requirement of experience to establish financial statement in the preparation of standard documents, and the difficulty to obtain payment for contract carry out. So besides the regulatory reform, we have made a training and technical support program for women. And as you know, the UN, UNIFAM, excuse me, has already participated on this program. And now we train women in order to be able to establish documents of tender, but also to be in order to know about public procurement more, and to be able to access to the contract. Because some people, when the regulatory system thinks that there is a equality problem regarding public procurement, but other actors are saying that it is too easy to give incentive and to give that much opportunities, and that everybody should be at the same level. And we don't think that. We think that there is really inequity. There are also sectors that are masculinized, so women can have access to them. And we believe that in the beginning, there were the men and women didn't start in the same position regarding to public procurement. And that is the reason why we kept on training beside that. But we also, today we also made measures regarding access to contracts, and administrative qualification documents are only required for the selected candidates, because women used to struggle with the document that were asked about to them. Also, there is possibilities of subcontracting in the new law, and a partnership between IRM, RCOP, and the public procurement funds. So,
please,
yes?
can I ask that you round up your thoughts?
Can you ask me?
To round up your thoughts. Round up.
Oh,
your thoughts.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay, so I was saying that beside the regulations and all the rules that we made, we also provide training and technical support. And today we have trained many SMEs. We have trained people from UN Women. We have also have training programs for some ministries and some other actors. And we consider having partnership with a lot of ministry, and to keep going, and then making sure that women will have more access by training, beside all this regulation that we made to promote access.
Thank you very much, Fatma. Muriel, your hands are up.
Yes, thank you very much, Emeka. And thanks to Ms. Sal for the presentation. Her remarks. I just wanted to say that RMP and RCOP Senegal is a key partner, and we're working with them towards gender responsive public procurement in Senegal. And they had a presentation. So their presentation details all the reforms ongoing. So we've shared that in the chat. I think it was among the master template for this webinar. So you will see all the information around what they're doing in Senegal. They're doing amazing things, so you can read it. But it's in French, so you can also Google Translate if you want to learn more about that. Or you perhaps we can have Mr. Diop and Ms. Tal give their email in the chat. If they want some information in English. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Muriel. I think that information will be very, very relevant for other countries across the region. So we have our last panelist online, Ms. Charity Komujarizi. She's the Monitoring and Evaluation Coordinator, Africa Freedom of Information Center, AFIC. Ms. Charity, are you online?
Yes, I'm online.
Oh, excellent. So I have a question for you. So your organization recently conducted a research on gender responsive procurement in East Africa. And we know that gender responsiveness in East Africa has really taken off. What patterns have you seen across the region on how innovation is implemented in gender responsive procurement from both women's businesses and from the government? Please, I want to just kindly ask that you restrict your interventions to 5 minutes, please. Thank you. And over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. It goes with the note that across the region of East Africa, the findings from our study were very similar to the findings in West Africa. So it seems that the problems in East Africa are very similar to the problems in West Africa. Yes, it's Africa. But across the region where we have presented these findings, actually they have been accepted and they recognize that gender responsive procurement has the potential to unlock the inequality gap. And I must note that across the region, we found that actually women-led businesses are very many. And it's surprising that only 1% are participating in public procurement. We find that, for example, in Tanzania alone, 51% of the registered businesses are owned by women. But why is it that they are not doing business with government, but rather with private sector? In Kenya, the percentage is also high at 48%, in Uganda at 44%, Ethiopia at 62%. However, we find that some of the good innovations and practices that are happening is that beyond the policy enactment, governments like Kenya have gone ahead to develop specific programs to support women businesses in public procurement. Kenya has a program that is very specific, and it's called the Access to Government Procurement Opportunities. This program supports special groups, including women, youth, and people with disabilities. And under this program, it reserves 30% of all public procurements for those special groups, but specifically 15% is set apart for women. Yes, it has other challenges on its own, the implementation process. However, it has seen women's participation in public procurement increase, and there's a lot of positivity to that effect. In Tanzania as well, there is the law that enables 30% participation, but it has gone ahead to find innovative ways of implementing this law. Specifically, some ministries, like the Ministry of Works, set aside a quota for women engineers. So women engineers in Tanzania have a 30% leverage to participate and win contracts for construction under that ministry. The surprising bit is that other ministries are yet to learn from this specific one, but it is working well, though from our discussions, there are limitations that these women must be in groups, must have qualified engineers, but there's a discussion that this can be improved. The other innovation is around financing and financial support. Countries like Ethiopia, they don't have a specific law that supports women participation. Their procurement law is gender blind, but have supported women groups. And these women groups, for example, were able to come up with a women's development bank. This bank is called the Enat Bank. It's owned by women entrepreneurs, and all registered women-led businesses in Ethiopia have the right to go and access funds at zero interest. The challenge with that is that not many women are aware of this facility, but this innovation is there to support the financing bit of women-led businesses. We also see that in a country like Rwanda, the women groups have gone ahead to collect money in their circles, in their business groups, and they finance their businesses through joint collections. We found this a very innovative way of supporting each other, especially financially. We also see that there are innovations by development partners to support women-led businesses, among which include UN Women, which is doing a lot of capacity building, the African Development Bank. There are also programs with the USAID and other actors, but the UN Women and the African Development Bank came out very often in the discussions that we were having. Furthermore, some of the innovations that we have seen that comes from the women-led businesses, they have formed groups. These groups have been formalized into associations, organizations, to have a collective voice. Through their collective voices, they have been able to mobilize funds and also interventions that have supported their capacity in different ways. I'll give an example of the Uganda Women's Entrepreneurs Association. This group is for women-led businesses. Because they have been organized, it has been easy for them to be approached with different programs by both government and development partners. So this kind of practice is good. It supports different people at different levels. However, across the region, we find that most of these opportunities are being accessed by women in urban centers. So the rural women are still lagging behind, which is also a biggest worry, as they are the biggest population. The other innovation is the innovation of identity. This has been seen mostly in Tanzania. To be able to identify these women-led businesses in Tanzania, you are only able to access support from the government, especially only if you can form groups. And these groups have been given specific numbers, of course, under registration, and they're able to be stressed anywhere across the country. Yeah, so generally, those are the good practices, but the challenges and the gaps are as similar, are the same, like my colleague Andy presented. And from the presentation of our findings, we found that our government's actually ready, and at the time when they were thinking about revising the policies, especially in Ethiopia and Tanzania, and everyone who listened to these findings appreciated and is willing to do something. And
thank you very much,
we
Charity.
think at AFIC, yes, we think that the same way that governments have been able to promote women's participation in the political spaces, the same energy should be redirected to supporting women-led businesses to increase their participation and tap the procurement opportunities. And by doing so, we are going to realize SDG 5 and our goal by 2030.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that excellent presentation. And yes, so what we need to do is to actively challenge, mitigate those challenges. We have to have strategies and innovative practices to mitigate those challenges. And thank you very much for sharing those experiences. Me as a practitioner, I'm trying to increase access of women-owned businesses in Nigeria. I've learned a lot from this experience that you've shared. So thank you very much, Charity. So back to our participants, I can assure you, we have very few more minutes. We will use just 10 minutes for the question and answer, and then we will conduct our poll. And after the poll, we will close for the day. So I assure you, just bear with us for the next 10 to 15 minutes. So colleagues and participants, this is the time to ask questions to our panelists. From the women entrepreneur, her experience in participating in public procurement, to Charity, who shared some of the experiences in East Africa, and then to our regulator in Senegal, who are leading and actually having very, very pragmatic approaches to ensuring that women-owned businesses participate in public procurement in Senegal. So please, if you have questions, comments, and contributions, please include them in the chat box. Even if your questions and contributions are in French, please kindly include them in the chat box and we will read them out. Muriel, please, I think there's a comment, a contribution in French. Please, we can acknowledge that contribution.
Okay, thank you, Emeka.
Do we have any questions or contributions? As Muriel said, please, you can also access all the documents, the presentations in the Google Drive link that has been shared. Even if you've not had a first look at those documents, after having that first look at the documents, you can always reach back to us with your comments and your contributions regarding the documents that we've provided to you. But it would be very good to have some of your feedback from the panel discussion. Do we have any colleagues? Are we writing? I will assume we're writing something very lengthy. That's why it's taking time. Okay, so in the absence of any question or any contribution, let me call on Muriel to conduct the poll, and then we close. Muriel, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Emeka. Well, people are shy to send us question in the chat. So, oh yes, I have a question about the policy brief. So our policy brief is ready in French and English. So we'll send it to you via email by tomorrow with the recording, but you can also access it on our website during the week. So it will be available. Andy, back to you for the poll.
All right, thank you very much for everyone. Thank you for your patience, because I know this call has been a lengthy one, but we're at the tail end of the call now. If you look in the chat section, I have dropped 2 links for our post-event survey. One is in French. You can access the survey in French, and you can also access it in English. Your feedback is very much welcome. And once again, thank you for participating in the launch of our policy brief. all the resources will be shared with you after the call by tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'll be the last person to, oh, so we do have a question now.
Yes.
How do we work around the issues related to literacy levels of women in regards to access to information, in their participation of public procurements?
I can give it a go, and then maybe any of our other speakers can intervene. So what we did, following the example of Ekiti State, as you saw, a woman-owned business joined, and her first language is not English. Her first language is Yoruba, the Ekiti dialect. So that's why there was the challenge around translation. So what we did in that state, and why she was able to participate in procurement opportunities, was that all of the resources that the Bureau had on public procurement was translated into the local dialects there. And we also carried out awareness campaigns on the radio, which was delivered in English, in Yoruba, and in the Ekiti dialect. So those are some of the ways. Understanding those barriers is also trying to reach the women-owned businesses at the areas where they are most engaged. So the radio proved to be a very valuable resource for us through this project.
Thank you very much, Andy. I think we can even learn from that experience as we implement all our programmatic activities across the region. So thank you everyone for joining this launch of the policy brief. We've come to the end of the sessions. But before we go, there's something one of our presenters said today, and I want us to reflect on it as we go, that the challenges women-owned businesses face across the region is a reality, and there is a call to action. We actually have to see how we can help our women-owned businesses to not just only participate, but to also benefit from public procurements. As we conclude, let us reflect on that across our countries and see how we can contribute from a legal perspective, from a policy perspective, from advocacy, from awakening and trainings and capacity building. There's a lot of work to be done. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a lovely day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
You. God bless you.